From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Is this the year of the independent? Matt Brown hopes so. The former Democratic Secretary of State says he is strongly considering a run for governor as an independent. The announcement took Rhode Island's political class by surprise and could prove problematic for incumbent Democrat Gina Raimondo. Where does Brown stand on the issues, and why did he leave a party that once saw him as a rising star? Our guest this week on Newsmakers, Matt Brown. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Matt Brown, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us in studio. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We were talking, you probably have not been on the show since Tim's father was the host back when you were Secretary of State.
It's been a long time pulling into this parking lot, but it's good to be back, for sure.
Well, we're glad to have you, and we obviously want to dive into why you're here. You're considering a run for governor. In 60 seconds, why do you want to be governor?
Cut me off at 60. I obviously grew up here. This is where our roots are, and like a lot of people, I feel like the state has just been stuck for a long time, for decades. I think people are struggling, and they have been for a long time, struggling to afford health care, struggling to afford the basics, struggling to afford housing. Why is it that we can't get a good education for all our kids? Why is it that we have the highest poverty rate in New England? You know, it doesn't have to be this way. I think sometimes we blame each other, right? Group against group, and we're pitted against each other in these ways. That's not what we need to do. We need to come together and focus on the problem, which I think is our political system. I think we need to make changes. We need new ideas. We need bold ideas about how to solve these problems, and that's what I'm putting forward in this campaign.
So we're going to talk a lot about policy during this show, but Ted and I want to tackle politics before we get to all of that. I checked in with the Providence Board of Canvassers, which are election officials for the city of Providence, where you live. And in recent elections, you voted in the Democratic primaries in 2012, 2014, and 2016. You would immediately unaffiliate as you walked out the door, but you voted in the Democratic primaries. Look, Matt, people are going to hear that and say, all right, he says he's an independent, but he's really a Democrat.
Well, I was a Democratic Secretary of State, and as you say, I have voted in a number of Democratic primaries. About 5 years ago, I disaffiliated, and as you said, after each election, you have to affiliate to vote in a primary, then you can disaffiliate on the way out, which I've done because I want to be unaffiliated. And the reason is that I think that the fight that matters for us is not us against them. It's not group against group. It's really the fight of all of us together against the problems that we're facing, which I think are big. In some ways, they're bigger than they've ever been. So, and this is consistent with my record. I mean, I was Secretary of State as a Democrat for 4 years, but the rest of my working life has been starting and running nonpartisan organizations. City Year, working in the schools and communities here in Rhode Island, and more recently Global Zero, working to reduce the threat of nuclear weapons around the world.
Have you ever voted in a Republican primary, though?
No.
Why did you end up leaving the Democratic Party?
Well, good question. I mean, for that reason, really a feeling that I think built up over time that the system wasn't working, that the problems weren't getting better, that in fact the problems are getting bigger, and our political system seems to me, and I think a lot of people, unable to address the problem, seems not up to the task. And so, as I said, I think we need to try some different things, and I think we need to be bold, and I think we need to think outside of the current thinking that our system is offering.
Where do you see yourself now falling on the political spectrum as people try to figure out who is this guy?
You know, that's a good question. I'm not sure I think that the way that we think about the political spectrum is helpful or accurate. I would say look at two things. Look at what I've done for work. I mean, if you're trying to get a signal about, do we agree? I mean, for the voters and people out there, do I care about the kind of things you care about? Look at the things I've done. So starting organizations like City Year that works in communities and schools, starting organizations like Global Zero, working across, bringing people together across all backgrounds and party lines, which we can talk more about to do those things. And then look, maybe more importantly, at the ideas I'm putting out. And you can put whatever labels you want on them. I'm not sure they fit easy labels. I mean, I'm talking about doing things in, I think, quite a different way. I'm talking about, maybe we'll get to these things, but starting a bank here in the state so we can bring our money back from Wall Street, starting the first fully clean energy system in the country so we can create up to 10,000 jobs for people here in the state, jobs that can't be outsourced. I'm not sure there's a label to put on those ideas. I think they're bold. That may be a label.
Well, who did you vote for president in 2016?
I'm not going to get into my voting record. I think I think
that was a big election. You won't say
well,
who you picked?
That can be a proxy for a lot of people.
I think it could be. But I think the privacy of the ballot is important. I think it's an important principle of American democracy. I don't want to open that up and go through all of that. I think what I want to do is focus on the ideas that I have, the record that I have. And again, not just my own ideas. I mean, I'm not the only one who has ideas. We've got 1 million people in the state. I want to go out and meet them and hear what their ideas are.
Before we look ahead at your ideas, I do want to look back at 2006 U.S. Senate race against Sheldon Whitehouse in a Democratic primary. Your campaign was scrutinized for campaign finance issues, for raising money through state Democratic parties in Maine, Massachusetts, and Hawaii. People saw it as a way around donation limits. You told TED in an interview recently and pointed out that the FEC looked at that and said there were no issues. But people took issue with it, even if regulators didn't. Do you regret that now?
Yeah, I missed that. I knew it was allowed under FEC laws. I said that at the time. The FEC, a dozen years ago, looked at it because the complaint was filed. They looked at it, and they said that was right, that there was, as they said, no basis for the complaints, and they dismissed it. But I did miss how it could be perceived badly, and that's my responsibility. And that campaign obviously created a problem for that campaign, and that campaign was ultimately unsuccessful, and that's entirely my responsibility. I have, a door closes and another opens, so I'm very happy about the work I did as we left the Secretary of State's office and starting and running Global Zero. And I've started a number of organizations over the last 25 years and run them, and they've all been successful, except that campaign was unsuccessful. But you move on.
Go ahead, Ted.
How close are you? You've described it as an exploratory campaign, but everything, both when I interviewed you and listening to what you've told other reporters, you sound like someone who's going to be running for governor and will be on the ballot this fall. How close are you to taking off the exploratory label and saying, I'm definitely running for governor?
Pretty close. I think I do want to go out and talk, as I've said when we talked before. I want to talk to people in the state. I want to, all different backgrounds, different parts of the state, talk about these ideas, hear their ideas. I mean, obviously, I'm from here. I grew up here. I've worked here for years. I know a lot about, I think, what people are feeling and how they're feeling. But I want to talk about the context of this particular campaign, the ideas I have, what's going on in the state, and then we'll make an announcement from there.
Have you? You've been in it only about a week or so now, so I don't want to get it too far ahead of ourselves. But have you gotten any elected officials said I'm gonna support you for this, or interest groups or anything like that who are behind you, or are you still on your own?
No, I'm still on my own, but but also I haven't been making those calls. I mean, I'm starting with, look, I think campaigns begin and end with the people, the voters. I think, endorsements are fine. I'm sure we'll get some. We won't get others, but it's not really my focus. My focus is getting out and talking to the people, the voters, and hearing what they think and having them hear a little bit about my ideas.
What did you think? I've heard echoes in some of what you've said so far. You can talk if you think I'm wrong about this, but of the Bernie Sanders campaign. Some of how he came, Bernie Sanders himself had not been a Democrat. He got into the Democratic primary in the 2016, which is a little different, but some of the talking a lot about people and the issues of corporations and some of the big thinking about wind power and things like that. Do you see any overlap between sort of what the Sanders campaign did in 2016 and what you're trying to do here?
Well, I do think that Bernie Sanders' critique of our economy was correct. I do think that for a long time, for many decades, we have had an economic and a political system, a government that has really transferred wealth and economic power and political power from people and communities to big corporations and banks. I think that through subsidies, in all kinds of ways that's happened. So I thought that was an important critique. I think the other thing that was meaningful about Bernie Sanders' campaign is that he seemed to be saying what he believed. And a lot of times, I think voters accurately, people pick up that politicians are scripted. They're giving their canned talking points to reporters, to the public, to speak.
That never happens.
What are you talking about?
And they're giving speeches, and I think people picked up that he was just really saying what he believed, take it or leave it. And I think that would be a better way to do our politics.
All right, let's find out where Matt Brown stands on some of the issues. And how I want to kick this segment off is I'm going to do a series of what I like to call rapid fire questions. And Matt, what I'm looking for is one-word answers on these questions as we rattle through these, okay? Good luck.
I do my best.
Are you pro-choice or pro-life?
Pro-choice.
Do you support or oppose the legalization of recreational marijuana?
Support.
Do you support or oppose legislation that would ban semi-automatic rifles like the AR-15 from Rhode Island?
Support.
Do you support the state's minimum wage going up to $15 an hour?
Yes.
I should probably ask you in a bit the timeline on that. Do you support or oppose the proposed natural gas fire plant in Burrillville?
I oppose it. I want to talk about that later.
Okay. And true or false? This is a political question, but true or false? Your entrance
truth or dare here? Okay.
Your entrance into the race hurts Governor Raimondo's chances.
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, that's for
come on, yes
guys.
You do.
No, I really don't. I mean, I've honestly, since I announced, I've heard all sides of that argument. I would say I think these things are usually, in my experience, campaigns are hard to predict. I mean, it's hard to lay out at the beginning how it's going to unfold. I think the dynamics are usually more complex than people and experts think. So I don't think there's. I don't know, and I don't think anybody else knows.
What do you see as the biggest difference between, people are going to hear those answers and going to say, okay, he's more on the Democratic side of the spectrum than, you don't sound like a Republican, at least I'd say in a lot of those answers. What do you see as the biggest difference between you and Governor Raimondo?
Well, I just have a whole different set of ideas. I mean, they're not tweaks on the governor's ideas. They're not tweaks on the Republican side's ideas. They're really new ideas. So, for example, the idea that we ought to build a new energy system and we ought to do it by 2035. We ought to be the first in the country, and not just to provide our own energy, but to be the first state that exports clean energy as a source of revenue for the state. I don't hear that coming from either side. I don't hear coming from either side the idea that when we build that system, we ought to do it in a way that not just corporations and banks own it and get the profits forever, but that the people of the state do. That we give them a stake the way that they do in Alaska. So in Alaska, everybody gets a sorry, this thing is falling off.
That's okay. That's okay. Right. We'll go to a break pretty soon. All right. But since you brought up the Alaska model, I have a question about that. You talk about that fair share of energy costs, and first of all, in Alaska, you know what they have that we don't?
Yes.
They're drilling for oil there.
That's right,
And I know you like to say where oil is to them as wind is to Rhode Island. But if you start, I'm wondering if you start putting strings attached to paying the people of Rhode Island dividends off of wind power, why would any corporation come to a state and build off the coast when there are those types of strings attached, where they might just go to New Jersey where, hey, they got plenty of wind as well?
Well, this is what I'm saying. We have to take our economic and our political destiny in our own hands. Why is it, part of the reason that even though it's better for the economy, it's where the jobs are going to be in the future, it's better for the environment to go to clean energy. Part of the reason it hasn't happened is because the people who have all the money, which are the banks and the corporations, they don't want to do it right now. They don't think they can make a killing off of it. There's a profit to be made. Projections are 8% returns. That's pretty darn good. So we need to put.
But won't you cut into their profits by putting those types of regulations?
Or are we going to start the company ourselves as Rhode Island?
No. We're going to be we're going to invest, and we're going to have a stake. And so, like in the Alaska model, yes, they don't do wind, they do oil, but they own the fields. They take a stake in it. They collect the rent, and they use that rent to give everybody in the state, as you know, a rebate check every year. There's no reason we can't do that with wind. There's no reason we can't have a stake. These are our natural resources. The idea that started in this country, over 100 years ago, that corporations and banks can take everything in society, the natural resources, influence over our government, and push the people out of that. That doesn't have to be that way. It can be another way. And there are a lot of models for giving people a stake in their economy, and we need to do that here in Rhode Island.
One reason that companies often are the ones looked to on these things is they have capital to invest up front to build the infrastructure, and then they take their return on it. How much do you think Rhode Island, the government of Rhode Island, then would need to put up front to build out the wind farm system you're thinking of, so that they would then have something to sell the energy to and get a dividend?
Okay, well, a couple things about that. First of all, the cost of building renewable energy systems is falling so fast, it's almost hard to keep up with it. So the cost of building a wind system has fallen by 50% over the last 2 years. 50%. The cost of doing solar has fallen by 85% within the last decade. So these costs are falling quickly. Secondly, where do we get the capital? Well, this gets to the other idea that I've been talking about, which is the idea we got from North Dakota. that 100 years ago, in an era very much like ours, a robber baron era where all the wealth was consolidating, the farmers there couldn't get any money to do their farming, so they started their own bank. And they took the money back from the big banks to invest in their own state. That's what I'm saying we should do here. And a lot of states are looking at this now since the Wall Street crash of 2008. So our government takes over $2 billion of our taxpayer money every year. What do they do with it? They put it in Wall Street banks. What do those banks do with it? They invest it all over the world, Dubai, China, everywhere else, investing in infrastructure, investing in economies, and taking all the profit themselves. Where do they not invest? Rhode Island. Who doesn't get the benefit of our own tax dollars? Rhode Islanders. So this bank could be a source of funding for something like clean energy that would create up to 10,000 jobs here in the state. Why are we giving our money to Wall Street banks who in the end, as we know, eventually are going to be so reckless they're going to lose the money anyway?
I am well overdue for a commercial break, so why don't we take that now? Our conversation with Matt Brown continues. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Matt Brown. He's strongly considering a run for governor as an independent. I want to ask you about one of Governor Raimondo's big proposals in her first term, and that was under the roadworks proposal. The state will start tolling large commercial trucks to help pay for infrastructure. If you become governor, would you keep that in place or work to get rid of truck tolls?
You know, I would look at that, but I think the bigger issue here is that we have a lot of problems in the state. We have a lot of needs that aren't being met, from schools to affordable housing, clean energy, and so on. And the only solution that our government offers to come up with revenue for these problems is to raise taxes or put the state further into debt. That's it. Those have been the only solutions we've had for as long as I can remember. And it's not true that those are the only options. There are other ways. That's why I'm proposing this bank like North Dakota has. The thing about the idea of bringing our money back from Wall Street, that $2 billion, putting it in that bank, it's not just that we do one-time investment in the state. It's that we invest in things that are important and profitable. What do we do with those profits, like they do in North Dakota? Those profits become more revenue for the state to continue to invest in and meet needs in the state. So this is a new and different way to generate revenue forever for the long term to solve problems we have in this state.
But that bank, I don't think that's been a panacea for North Dakota. When the oil market collapsed, I don't recall reading, oh, we have our bank, we're all set. They were looking at deep budget cuts and things because they were tied into the economy, even though they're the only state with a state-owned bank.
Yes, but you got to look at the fact that through the Great Depression and through the Great Recession, North Dakota did much better than other places because of the bank. So when the Wall Street banks collapsed in 2008, we had 12,800 Rhode Islanders who were foreclosed. Our economy tanked. We lost thousands of jobs. Didn't happen in North Dakota. Why? Because when the Wall Street banks collapsed, people were looking for a safe place to put their money, and they put it in the North Dakota bank. The North Dakota bank went from about $2.5 billion in assets at the beginning of the crash to just a couple of years ago over $7 billion. It's been some of their most profitable years was in a downturn. It's a safer place to put money than the Wall Street banks.
Lawmakers and the governor have to deal with annual budget deficits. How quickly would you get this revenue-generating bank online? What's a turnaround time on something like that?
I mean, there's nothing holding us back. I mean, so all we have to do is
1 year, 2 year, 4 years, 10?
No, not 10 and not 4, 1 or 2. I mean, so, we have to set it up, but it's pretty straightforward. We're not talking about a bank with branches and overhead. We're talking about a bank that is an investment bank. We're talking about a bank like in North Dakota that actually does their transactions in partnership, makes their loans in partnership with local banks. So it's a pretty quick thing to stand up. We also have the benefit of the North Dakota model. But just about the local banks, because I know we've just lost some, and local banking is so important as a counter to the monopoly of the Wall Street banks, and we've got some great local banks and credit unions here. This bank, by partnering with local banks, essentially backing up their loans with more funding for the loans, would grow the local banking industry dramatically. So the average across the country is local banks in various states are at about 22% of the banking industry. In North Dakota, they're 83%, the local banks. That's where we would be headed toward if we had the kind of bank I'm talking about to back them up.
Talking about banks so much, I feel like I'm on Executive Suite.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, for the other show. So I heard you there. You were critical of raising taxes, and as well as bonded indebtedness that keeps rising in Rhode Island. So are you ruling out tax increases to fund your programs?
What I'm saying is we need other options. I mean, we're stuck in a lot of ways, and our government, again, not just for the last 3 years, but as long as I can remember, says, well, we have two choices. We go into more debt with bonds, or we raise your taxes. And it's just not true. And
or cut spending, people would say.
Or cut spending. Look, I mean, right now, what's happening? We have a $200 million deficit, and that is being plugged. That deficit is being plugged in part by our government taking from affordable housing programs, by taking from energy efficiency programs. They call it, raiding those scoops. So this is really all we can do. So people are out. I would say generally speaking, most people, corporations have a lot of money, banks have a lot of money, but I'd say the rest of the people don't have enough. They're struggling. I know that. You know that. And so the only solutions you're offered, you're right, there are three: raise taxes for people, which takes more money from them. If you're talking about middle class taxes, go into debt, which takes more money from us because we've got to pay the interest and the fees on that, which runs up to tens of millions of dollars a year. Or you're right, or cut programs that are desperately needed, like for affordable housing in schools and so on. And I'm saying it's not true that those are the only solutions. There are other solutions, but we're going to need to think differently. We're going to need to be bold, and we're going to need to wake up.
Would you consider rolling back any of the pension reform changes Governor Raimondo championed as treasurer, like restoring COLA payments?
Well, I think look, we got to get to the root of the issue here. So the root of the issue with pension reform, which I think has not been resolved, is that it goes back to what we were just talking about, is that government for decades couldn't plug its budget. So it broke its promise to workers and took the money that was supposed to go in their pensions by contract, promised to them, and they just took it to plug their budget holes because they couldn't manage their budget. That's the problem, and that problem hasn't been solved. That's what we're just talking about. They're still raiding, the government is still raiding commitments it's made to affordable housing, to energy efficiency, to things that we need. It's still...
but to Tim's specific question,
yeah.
would you try to look to restore benefits to, we still hear from retirees all the time who say, I want my COLA restored. Every year.
Yeah, I think we should look at that. We should look at that, all of these things in the context of some new ways of generating revenue for the state, like a bank, like an energy system that the state and the people have a stake in that generates revenue for the state without more taxes, without more debt, and without scooping or raiding money from things that are desperately needed.
Some of the issues that would come before you if your governor wouldn't be necessarily exactly a revenue up or down kind of thing. One that's been debated big this year and last year is this continuing contracts bill. The municipal unions would like to be able to have their contracts stay in effect until a new one is reached, even if they've passed their expiration date. Governor Raimondo vetoed that last year. Labor was very unhappy, and the legislature didn't override or veto. Would you sign or veto that if it came before you?
That's what I would need to look at that, and I'm watching that debate, and I need to go out and, like I said, I'm exploring, so I need to go out and talk to people about that, talk to workers about that, talk to cities and towns about that.
How about binding arbitration for teachers? That's another one they've been pushing hard and haven't had success with yet.
Well, all these things are things I'm going to be looking at in the coming weeks and talking to all the stakeholders, and we'll come back to you on those.
Paw Sox, we talk about ad nauseum. I know you have talked about if the Paw Sox proposal goes forward, you'd want the state to have some ownership stake in that. So it sounds like you would be open to some public spending and some model for a new stadium.
Yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, what I am for is a different way of doing economic development. So the way we do it now are giveaways. They're called incentives, but by the way, there's a lot of evidence, there are a lot of experts who believe they're not incentives, that corporations, that the money that we give to corporations is actually not a factor in getting them to come here. They come here, they choose states based on schools, based on governance, et cetera.
So that's a left turn, but so you think a segment of GE, Johnson & Johnson, Virgin Pulse, they wouldn't have come here without they would have come here without those incentives, is what you're saying?
I think that's totally possible. I think we don't know, but I think there are a lot of experts who certainly believe that. There are a lot of, there are reports coming out of the Brookings Institution, all kinds of places saying that this is basically just a way of playing states off against each other, and it's a race to the bottom. So right now, the way what we do with our state funding with economic development is they're giveaways. We tax people who don't have very much money, and with those taxes we give it to corporations who do have a lot of money. right? They've got more money than they know what to do with. This is a drop in the bucket for them, these giveaways. What I'm saying is that we do economic development by investing. So we invest in clean energy and we get a return. Why shouldn't the people get a return for their investment? Why is the model that we tax people and we give money away, we just give the money to corporations and the people don't get their fair share of the returns? So when it comes to the Paw Sox, same thing. I love the Paw Sox. I mean, I love the Paw Sox, I love the Red Sox, I coach Little League, we go to the Paw Sox. Would love for them to stay here. If the state's going to be a financial investor, the state should get an ownership stake and get profits. By the way, might be great for revenue. The Green Bay Packers are, the people there have a stake, and every game is sold out. It's their team, right?
Yeah, fine. So. All right, hardest question of the show is we're getting to the bottom. Are you rooting for PC or URI right now? We're actually taping as PC plays.
Oh man, are you kidding me?
It's a tough show. Welcome back.
Yeah, right. No, I'm not getting into that. Listen. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you know what? I have, because we are almost out of time. The main question for us, for you is, will you debate your opponents on WPRI if you decide to run for governor?
Absolutely.
It's a solid yes. We have to get you on the record.
All
for
right,
that.
I'm on the
So we
record.
have to play it later if you back out.
Matt Brown, thanks for joining us on the
Thank you
program.
very
For Ted
much.
Nisi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.